Welcome to Healing the Tigress, a podcast of stories and conversations on Asian American Pacific Islander maternal mental health. We are your hosts, Peggy, a licensed clinical social worker,
and Jasmine, a clinical pharmacist. Both of us are Taiwanese American mothers and survivors of postpartum depression and anxiety.
We don't know about you, but we didn't grow up talking much about mental health in our families, and we want to change that now that we are mothers.
Together, with our clinical backgrounds and passion on the subject, we want to create a safe space for the AAPI community to discuss perinatal mental health issues.
And together, we want to break generational cycles in our own parenting journeys so that we can heal our inner tigress, a nod to the tiger moms before us. We're so happy you're tuning in here. Let's get started.
Before we begin, we wanted to note that this episode discusses pregnancy and infant loss, which may be difficult for some listeners.
Hello, listeners. Today's episode is one we really wanted to make sure that we shared during October. October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month and is again another topic that we so often avoid talking about, especially among our AAPI circles. But I feel like we're doing a disservice to the mothers who are grieving and the babies we've lost when we don't share these stories. Today's guest is Katrina dela Cruz, a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist, spiritual coach, and counselor. She's worked with patients in hospitals for over a decade, including in care for maternal mental health on OB/GYN and L&D units, before beginning her private practice, where she integrates Western psychological theory with energy work, sound healing, plant spiritism, and ancestral healing traditions. Katrina, we are so thrilled to have you here with us today. Please introduce yourself, tell us about your cultural background and your motherhood journey.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with both of you and with all of you in the audience. And my background is that I'm actually 100% indigenous Filipino. I'm very proud of that. I did the 23andMe and was expecting that, like many Filipinos, my culture would be very mixed. My heritage would be kind of a mixed bag. And it wasn't. It came back and I was 100% Ilocano, consistent with as far as we can trace by memory with my ancestors on my family tree.
Wow.
So,
and happy Filipino Heritage Month as well.
Thank you. Thank you for acknowledging
so
that.
Serendipitous.
It is, yes. And my motherhood story is beautiful and tragic. I have 2 spirit babies, and I got pregnant really quickly once I was in a serious relationship. My partner and I had a discussion in December of 2021, and then February 2022, I was pregnant. And so everything seemed really magical and wonderful. I did have a little bit of a challenging pregnancy in that I had the nausea, but it was beautiful and I was enjoying it. And then I got information that no mother wants, that my child had a terminal condition. We went through lots of scans and confirmed many what they call terminal fetal anomalies. And I was told not to expect him to survive the birthing process. So, I talked to many medical professionals. One of my OBs even said that I would probably carry to term, but that he would be stillborn. Wow. And so we had to choose to terminate for medical reasons, which isn't a choice, as any woman who has had to make that choice will attest to. So I carried until about 19 weeks, which we also specifically chose because we were told that after 20 weeks, it becomes more complicated. I did carry long enough so that I could feel my baby. And that's very loaded as well, because it's beautiful and wonderful, and also, already makes a challenging decision even harder. It's unfortunate that my partner, at the time, so we're no longer together, but at the time he wasn't able to feel the baby move. So it was just me. But after that process, we thought, there was no discussion of having children afterward because we really need to heal. But I did get pregnant very quickly and very unexpectedly, not long after that. And then that pregnancy resulted in a missed miscarriage, and I actually bled over my first baby's due date.
Oh, wow.
Oh my gosh.
So fortunately, I've had a really unusual motherhood journey, but it's taught me a lot. I have a lost mom in my community who recently said that, and she's about 10 years out of her loss. And she says that the day she lost her baby went from being the worst day of her life to now, in some ways, one of the most joyful and pragmatic. And I can feel that transition happening already in my life, but it's certainly been a challenge. I have so many gifts from this experience, and I'm so thankful to be able to say that that I'm a mother after this. But we'll see what the future brings. I'm still technically in the childbearing window. But yeah, I've had an unusual journey.
Katrina, thank you for sharing that. And in a way that like you didn't cry, but I feel like I want to cry. But so you must have done so much work to like get to where you are right now. When did you find out about the anomalies that you had to start to do more research and make that decision, just so our listeners have a sort of timeline about that?
Thank you. There are definitely still moments when I cry. But I found out at about 15 weeks.
Okay.
So I did the NIPT, all the genetic testing. And to be honest, no one really pushed that, for better or for worse. I think people thought you're healthy, you conceived quickly. And so nobody pushed for me to get it as early as possible. I think the earliest you can get it is something like 8 or 9 weeks.
Yeah.
But, I think maybe around between 8 to 10 weeks is when I started to have scans, and I had my first prenatal appointments. And then I remember my OB saying, you should think about this. And then I think I actually went in for the testing around 13 weeks, which was even later than I had wanted it. But my clinicians were inundated at the time. So that was the earliest appointment I could get, and nobody pushed it through because I was advanced maternal age or anything. So it wasn't a fuss, and I didn't make a bigger fuss out of it. For a while there was some internal conflict with me, thinking if we had only found out sooner. And at the same time, I got to experience a part of motherhood that I wouldn't have had the honor to, honestly, if that had happened. So we can go back and forth with these things and say it should have been done this way, or I wish it had gone this way. I think it went the way it was supposed to. And I'm thankful for that. And it's also been hard.
And I think you actually named your babies, right? Can you
I did.
Do you want to tell us their names, or we don't have to either?
I will, yes. So my babies are Zeo Thomas, and the second one is Solis Vida.
They're beautiful names.
What does Solis Vida mean?
So Solis, there's a longer story, which I'll spare you for purposes of this podcast. But Solis is of the sun, and Zeo actually passed away on Summer Solstice. It was a multiple day procedure. But it culminated on Summer Solstice, which was not on purpose. That just happened that way. And Vida means life. My partner is half Mexican. And so it felt important to have that as part of it. And they have his last name as well. So
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I think it's important to honor them, and really humanize, they have names. So,
yeah. And I love that you call them your spirit babies, because they're still your babies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I think there are definitely a lot of listeners who have experienced this as well, whether miscarriage or their own, what is the acronym again? TFMR. So I think that being able to hear another mother share that, helps them feel seen, especially during this month. I know that you also do a lot of work with mothers who have been through the same thing. Was that something that you did even before becoming pregnant and becoming a mother, or was it a decision after your own grief process to begin working with these mothers?
I did begin working with mothers and with lost mothers prior to my losses. I say sometimes that I think my soul prepared me in the best way that it could for what transpired later.
Chills up and down when you said that.
I worked in hospitals for almost 11 years. And the last 2.5 years, I was actually an OB-GYN L&D social worker. And so I saw a lot of birthing stories, a lot of living children, healthy children, a lot of babies go home with families. And I saw a lot of the opposite. And I was actually with families several times when they birthed babies or when they lost babies that had trisomy 18, which is what Zeo had. So in some ways, this really prepared me for the losses. I was really fortunate in a strange way when I got my baby's diagnosis to already understand and not have those questions of what if in my head. I just knew that it was a fatal prognosis when I got the diagnosis. So it really prepared me in some ways. And I had been around mothers who endured what I ended up having to endure. And so that was helpful, but it's never the same, right? Both of you are also practitioners. So, when it's you, it's a whole other thing.
Yeah. Do you feel like it changed or impacted the way you were able to support those mothers after you experienced it yourself?
Absolutely. So by the time I had my losses, I had already been in private practice and I had started to work with women who were experiencing pregnancy and infant loss and fertility issues in my private practice. And then certainly once I experienced these things myself, it really informed the way that I was practicing. And I learned a lot, in retrospect. I think there were some things that I did, especially in the hospital, that I thought, oh gosh, that was so good that I did that. I would have wanted that. I did want that as a mother. And there were some things where I think, now that having the experience I have, I maybe could have done that a little bit better. But, it's all learning, right? So
it's always 2020, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Especially if you experience something yourself and you're just like, oh, I finally really understand what it's like to be in your shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And when you went through all that, do you think you had periods where it felt like depression or anything? Because I'm sure, people with infant loss, it's got to be so hard.
Yes. And I did, I was fortunate that I have really wonderful support and I was able to take a good break from work afterward. So I was able to give myself leave, even though I am self-employed. So yeah, I definitely had postpartum depression. It wasn't what it looks like when you have a living child. Mm-hmm. And you can argue that it was a combination of just postpartum depression and it was just depression after a loss. Right. But I definitely had those themes. And, luckily I feel that I had a good support system and I had tools in place, but it's never easy.
Mm-hmm. No, I can't imagine. So, yeah.
I know that you've mentioned before how difficult it was from being like visibly pregnant in front of your clients and then to be no longer visibly pregnant. I mean, I know it's not right away and you probably had to tell clients, I have to take a medical leave for some point. How did you navigate that space, like as a therapist, but also having to navigate that with clients that have been through the same thing? And suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, my therapist just went through the same thing, whether or not you disclose that to them.
Yeah, I'm still navigating it in some ways because I tend to be pretty open with my losses. And obviously I'm here on this podcast because it didn't feel like there was any way back after disclosing that I was pregnant, after people seeing that I was pregnant, and then knowing that I would have to, say that there's no living child in this situation, needing space during what would have still been pregnancy for me to take time away from my clients. I didn't have a choice, and I didn't have a model. I don't know anyone else who's a therapist who has had a pregnancy loss. So it was challenging. It was tricky. And, I'm on Instagram, and when I announced my pregnancy on Instagram, because it became clear that this was happening joyfully. And then we went through everything that we went through with the diagnosis. I didn't really have a way out. I couldn't it didn't feel right to delete posts. I certainly couldn't, say that something else was going on to my clients without feeling like I was being untruthful. And so I was open about what happened. And I luckily, I felt very supported by everyone. And I felt like my clients were really accepting and shared in my grief in some ways. And everyone really understood when I needed to take a step back. But I do think this is, again, fortunately, this is a really unusual area to receive this kind of education from. But I know there are other practitioners that must experience what I do, and it's hard. We're all trying to figure out what are the boundaries. As a therapist, you're taught to share very, very little about your personal experience. But when something like this happens, what do you do?
Yeah. I almost feel like it gives you more, like for your clients that are going through this too, though, it gives you a little bit of an edge, because they really know that you really understand what they're going through. And so I know it's like, probably therapists will not share about their personal lives. And this just sort of happened to kind of land the way it did for you and some of your clients. But I think that kind of gives you more power as a therapist, that you have the lived experience and the things you're counseling your patients on or clients on. And, your advice, I think, holds more weight, because you're not saying it from a place of speculation. You've gone through it. So I actually think that people knowing this probably, like if I were in someone's shoes like that, I'd want to seek out someone who could understand. So yeah, I think in a way that honesty and transparency is awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, I do have clients who have gone through similar situations. As I mentioned before, even after I went into my private practice, I think people knew about my background in OB and L&D. So I still have people on the spectrum of motherhood journeys who come to me for support. And one way or another, they figure out that I have this unique part of my background. And I do think it's helpful for the clients who choose to come to me. I'm sure in other ways it might be triggering for other people, but we all have our niche, and I didn't ever think this would be mine, but it might be. It's certainly losses.
I did not think postpartum depression would be mine. Like it's just not something you go around life thinking that's where I want to focus on. Like, so thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And what was that grieving process like? And like, because I know people that I have friends that have had miscarriages, and even a year or more later, they're still feeling it. And sometimes when they talk about it, they might mention like, other people think I should have moved on by now. But I feel like it's one of those things you can't tell people to do that. And it's always kind of maybe in the back of your mind. So how was that grieving and healing process for you? And maybe you're still even in the middle of it.
I think it continues to be a lot of education. So thank you for asking this question, because I think one of the challenges for women for families who've experienced pregnancy and infant loss is that it tends to be a little bit invalidated and sometimes invisible. If a woman isn't visibly pregnant, people don't know unless it's disclosed. And so, there's all kinds of things that people say unconsciously and certainly not meaning to do harm, but even asking women about their pregnancy journey when it's been challenging can be really, really activating. Asking if they're still planning on having children after a loss, if they're trying again, can be really challenging. And then even just acknowledging that there was a loss in general. I think, again, people say some unconscious and hurtful things, not trying to be harmful. And often they are actually trying to help, but acknowledging the loss is, you wouldn't say certain things to someone who lost a parent or certainly not a living child. And people say those things to women who have had miscarriages or pregnancy losses and even infant losses.
Yeah. I remember I was in my early 20s, like I was so young, and I had a family member suffer a miscarriage, and I wasn't a mom. I never had kids. I didn't know what to say. And I said, like, the awful thing that everyone say, don't say. It's like, oh, you can always try again. And like, it's like the one thing that people are like, please don't say that, And I think too, like I've had people reach out to me since becoming a mom and becoming a mental health professional and ask me for like advice of what to do when their friends have suffered infant loss or pregnancy loss. And I actually don't know. I still to this day don't know how to support my friends and family who have gone through it. What would you say are some things like people should know about supporting mothers in this time? Not just mothers, but families that are going through this. Because I think the first thing I thought of was like, okay, postpartum. Because like for me, it's like postpartum stuff, postpartum depression. And all I could think about, I remember telling this friend, I was like, oh man, I bet her body's still making milk. Like the first thing as like a breastfeeding advocate, I was like, oh my gosh, her body's probably still making milk. That must be really traumatizing too. Like that's the only thing I could think of. And I was like, I know that it's way more than that. And so what are some things that our listeners can use to support their friends and family, or even listeners who are going through this right now? What are some things you think can be really helpful?
Definitely validating the losses. This to a woman who's carrying, this is a living child already, right? And what you're saying about the breast milk, that is really important. I think a lot of women don't realize that that's actually something that they're going to have to go through after losing their baby. And there's nothing worse than, having your breast, lactating and you don't have a child to feed. So, all the remedies for drying up milk, those are actually really helpful to women who are experiencing that. I think one of the things about these losses is, very often afterward, families don't have a meal train, or they don't have people bringing them the remedies or the care packages that you would if they have a living child. You don't have people coming in saying, let me hold the baby or let me do this. But even offering those things means a lot. I think what I've heard and experienced at different points in my journey is that sometimes you don't want anyone there, but just knowing that people are there to support you in the same way that you would with a more typical loss or with a more typical pregnancy, with a more typical birthing process is really important, because women are still postpartum and you still lost someone. So I think the acknowledgement is probably the most important thing. And then there are amazing resources. I think having a community of mothers has been really important for me. And I know other mothers on this journey. Partners, definitely. I think partners, especially male-bodied partners, for whatever reason, don't have these same types of communities. So being able to put people in touch with other people who have similar experiences is really, really important.
Are there free resources you can think of off the top of your head where people can find these communities and groups?
There's an organization that I've been privileged to work with called Return to Zero. They are specifically for pregnancy and infant loss. And even if you're not somebody who is experiencing this loss process, this is just a good site to know about. They actually have a list of helpful things to do or don't do if you have somebody who's experiencing this in your circle. on their website, and they have groups and they have retreats. And Maternal Mental Health Now is also a great organization. I'm actually going to be doing a panel interview on pregnancy loss with them next month. So I'll link the registration link for you guys.
Yeah, we can always link, RTZ Hope and your panel as well.
Wonderful.
Have you checked out any of the PSI resources before?
I have, yes. Okay. So I've taken a look at 2020 Mom and some of the PSI International things, and they're great. I think Return to Zero is really close to my heart because that was also one of the resources when I was in hospital social work that I was giving out to mamas who were experiencing losses. Yeah. And then when I had my own losses and got involved with them, I really love the women who've started this organization. But I think there are really wonderful organizations out there. This is one where I've worked directly with them. So
I didn't know about them until you shared it, actually. So I'm glad to learn about another resource from you. Personally, being a volunteer for PSI myself, I know they have a lot of support groups for loss. They have really specific groups too, like Black moms, early pregnancy loss, pregnancy after stillbirth, even groups, pregnancy infant loss support groups for moms versus parents. So very specifically, like there's a difference. Mm-hmm. And also like termination for medical reason groups too. So they have really specific groups if people are looking for that. And those support groups are all free. So it's awesome.
Wonderful. Yeah, this was one of the blessings in disguises too from working in hospital social work with lost families is that I knew about Return to Zero before I actually started working with them. And there's also, I'm not on Facebook, but the Instagram community has some really wonderful resources as well. There's TFMR Mamas. Mm-hmm. There are mamas who are sharing their lost journeys online. So hashtags are all really helpful for this. Hashtag pregnancy and infant loss, hashtag lost mama. So there's community out there.
Yeah. I think the big thing is sharing these stories though, because it can be one of those really silent suffering things, particularly in our AAPI communities too, I think. I don't know if you feel, if your clients are more AAPI or not, do you feel that there's a difference? In terms of that extra cultural layer, like if they don't talk about it as much or not?
I have a very good mix of clients, but yes, I think especially with medical terminations, it can be tough. Mm-hmm. You can certainly say that this is a choice that you're making. It doesn't feel like a choice when you're going through it. I've never heard from a mom that this feels like a choice. And there are all sorts of implications when these things come to the table, So I think culturally, spiritually, there's a lot of influence. I have met people on this journey, even in my personal circle, who didn't disclose certain, even just losses where no decision had to be made, more later term losses where they silently suffered, as you say, because people just didn't know. They didn't know how to talk about it. They thought it would be easier on themselves and on their families if they just, moved on without bringing this up. And it continues to impact people later in life. I mean, I've had lots of mothers on this journey who, after I've been open about my losses, and again, that was in some ways I didn't have a choice at one point other than to choose that I was going to be open about this, after people already know I was pregnant. But I've had women disclose to me, that 30 years ago they had a loss at, 4 or 5 months. I've had women say that they actually had a stillbirths between 6 and 8 months. And these are not things that people talked about at the time.
There's almost like shame for some people, which is hard to wrap your mind around when, like you said, if it was the death of a living baby or any other family member, people aren't ashamed. But for some reason, there's this weird sense of shame, and I don't know, where that comes from, or how do we like wrestle with that?
Well, as we know, when you're carrying your baby, you're everything, right? Your food, your shelter, your safety. And so when women lose pregnancies or women don't have healthy babies, it kind of feels like, well, there's the target on my back, right?
It's your fault.
Exactly.
Yeah. Even though it's not.
It's not. It's not. These, and I hate to say these things happen, but sometimes things happen. And it's so easy to get caught up in the shame and accept responsibility for the health of your baby, even in things that are not preventable. And I mean, both of you know this also from postpartum. There's so much responsibility that women assume as mothers when there are things that are just outside the sphere of your control.
Yeah. It feels like if anyone, you're the vessel, right? And when you lose the baby, it seems like you lost it. You can't say your partner lost the baby. So I think maybe that is a little bit where the quote shame lies, feeling that you failed at something, and kind of that sense of worth, I think, which I also associate in like postpartum depression, where you feel like you're failing as a mother. I brought this baby here, but now I'm failing at, being a mother. And I think there's that definition to carry that baby to birth is part of that definition of your role. So that's hard. And I could tell, I could feel like, in a lot of Asian families, that sense of accomplishment, right? You just can't fail. You just can't fail at things. You can't talk about your failures.
Totally. Yes. And sorry, you had asked about specifically Asian American clients, but, I think, it's saving face, right? And it's, in Filipino culture, everything's okay. We're, as a culture, we're sort of, we're known for optimism. Everything's going to be okay. We smile and we feed you, right? And everything's going to be fine after that. And so, yeah, it's hard when nobody's actually saying, this really sucks, and I'm here with you for this. I'm here for this really hard part to be sad with you, and again, I personally have had a very supportive family, but I know that there is a wealth of experiences out there that are also not as positive in my community, where people are ostracized for making the decisions that they made, and where women aren't validated for what they're experiencing.
Yeah, I could see that, and just kind of thinking on a lot of the mentalities of just, okay, well, let's move on from this next, right? And that can be so hard and invalidating because you're grieving and people just want you to move on so you can be happy again. But I think that forced optimism, like you said, almost, it's like, why can't we just sit with this for a little bit? Why can't you let me sit with this for a little bit? Not everything has to be happy all the time. And this was a loss. This was a real thing. And like you named your babies. They're like real people.
What have you seen help a lot in your practice with families going through this? Like very practical things, like, are there any rituals or any type of, even just like, because it's one thing to have talk therapy, but are there things that you've encouraged folks to do that can help really symbolically process this grief or walk through this grief?
Yes. I mean, these tend to be very personal, but I did, as you acknowledged, I chose to name my babies. In many traditions, and many indigenous traditions, actually, it's customary to name your pregnancies. So I didn't immediately think to name either of my children. And then, post-mortem for both of them, I actually decided this is something that I'd like to do for me and for them and, for our families. So when you name a pregnancy, when you name a baby, and especially Solis, I almost didn't name, but because I thought it was so early. And then one of the practitioners that I actually work with really encouraged me to follow through with naming, because similar to the therapeutic process, when you can name something, then you can release it, then you can work through it, then you can symbolically bury it or, make meaning out of it, right? So we do this in therapy with feelings and emotions and with other experiences, where we actually work through it, talk it out, write it down. What was I feeling? What is this feeling? What is happening, or what happened to me internally? And the same was with the pregnancies. So I decided to name my children because it felt like then I can actually, for me, what I did was I symbolically buried them. I wasn't actually given remains for either of them. I had some tissue collected from my miscarriage, but I actually chose certain objects, stones, and different things, and buried them. And so that's one ritual. But again, I think this is all very personal in this. And at different stages, different things might feel appropriate or not. I think the lighting of candles is really beautiful. Every October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month, as you mentioned. And there's, on October 15th this year, we did something called the Wave of Light. So people everywhere were invited to light a candle for pregnancies and babies which were lost. And so the wave is sort of in different time zones, people lighting at, I think it was something like 7 p.m. everywhere in the world.
Oh, wow.
So at 7 p.m. your time, you lit a candle.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, different things. And so I these are certainly practices that I talk to my clients about, but again, up to their comfort level. Right. And there are different things. I think even, the laying of hands is really important in many different, I would say every healing traditions, but even women with postpartum with healthy babies, I think can experience some challenges with putting your hands on your own womb, right? It's such a sensitive area. And if you have had traumas to the space prior, it can be a very, very emotional thing to even just put your hands on your own body and send yourself love, send yourself healing. We do this as mothers, with your children all the time. You put your hands on your baby, you hold your baby. And with ourselves, we're not really taught to do that. And certainly after a loss or after that space has gone through so much, it's not something that you get guidance from your physician or from many other practitioners.
What would you say is a way, maybe not a way, I'm sure there's moms who've suffered losses after they have a living child too. And how do you counsel someone on how to grieve when they have another child also to take care of, but they're going through this awful time as well?
Mm-hmm. It's certainly a challenge because then they're also parenting a living child while they're experiencing these losses. What has been helpful with people that I've worked with, and also, again, people that I know of in the loss community, is to be open about the losses with their children, because the children also grieve, even when they're young. Even if they don't understand the loss, when they get older, it's actually really beautiful to see children in the community talk about, oh, my baby sister who passed away. I have a lost mama friend who has shared that the most helpful person to console her after the loss were actually, her child and her child's friends. who just said the children just natural empathy would just go up to her and say, that must have been so sad when your baby died, you know? And as adults, we're not really taught to go up to people and say those things, you know, we're taught to say other things, helpful or not. But just this kind of blind enthusiasm to be helpful that children have, just going up to someone and saying, that must have been really hard. That must have been sad for you, you know?
Again, I think there's that honesty and transparency that actually helps more than we realize. Instead of burying it or hiding it or not talking about it, being open and honest with your children, even your living children, to discuss this. And they can handle it. You know, I think they can handle it more than we realize they can handle this. And I think also your naming of your children, I know in a way you said so you could release them, but I think in a way it also helps them stay with you forever. You know, like because they're real presences you've named, right? So I think that's beautiful too.
Totally. Thank you for acknowledging that. And it, you know, it also, just briefly going back to the rituals, but it helps me communicate with their energy, right? In the same way that you may do with your ancestors, in the same way that you may do with your higher power or whoever it is that is maybe not here in a physical form.
You mentioned earlier too that as their anniversary comes of their passing, how now it's become something more beautiful. Can you talk a little bit more of just the symbolism of honoring them during that anniversary?
Yeah, I think in the same way that mothers don't forget their children's birthdays, their living children's birthdays, I also don't forget Zeo's due date. I don't forget the day that he died. I don't forget the day that I lost Solis, which was actually also would have been Zeo's, which was Zeo's due date. So yeah, I mean, there's still now for me more than them in some ways. These are still rites of passage, and those things historically have been very healing, you know, for human beings in general to have markers of growth. And so even if they're not here in physical form to grow, for many mothers and for me, I think it's been really important to mark this as maybe this is my growth. This is family growth, you know, maybe this is even a partner's growth.
So I know Peggy kind of mentioned that you're a very spiritual person and you do some, you know, ancestral healing traditions, or you combine a lot of East and Western medicine or practices. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. So we're at this really amazing time in history where things that were practiced as spiritual traditions are now sort of intersecting with the science, which I love. And so I figured this was a great thing to bring into my traditionally Western practice in therapy and in coaching. And, you know, there are many examples of this, but as one example, we now know some amazing things about sound vibrations, and that can translate into sound healing. You know, so we now know that everything has an energetic vibration, that sound is an energetic vibration, and that vibrations attune to each other, right? So this is kind of like when people say, I'm healing my vibe. They're, you know, they may not realize it, but they're actually looking to heal an energetic vibration. They're looking to have a more optimal frequency, a more optimal hertz. That's the measurement of energetic frequencies. And so now we know that at its optimal frequency, different parts of your body generate a certain amount of hertz. And so the theory with sound healing, for example, is that, you know, if you have an instrument that plays at a certain energetic frequency and you play it around a certain body part, then you can attune them. That's the theory, that you can attune so that your body then absorbs the energetic frequency and optimizes its own energetic frequencies. So I like to bring little things like this, and that's just one example, but I like to bring little things like this into my psychotherapy and my coaching practices, because I think we are also at an interesting time when people are looking to do more than have just talk therapy, or looking to more than just the Western theorist. And, you know, our diaspora as Asian Americans, I think, really speak to that, because I think, as you both can attest to, there are many different traditions in the Asian American culture that don't quite, or haven't traditionally quite had a place in Western theory and in Western practices. And now things are combining, and I think for the better, so that we not just have, pharmaceuticals at our disposal, but now we also have a lot of traditions brought in from traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, things which have actually been around much longer, are now being recognized as having a lot more scientific validation.
That makes me think of Jasmine's pregnancy journey with all the things that her doula was making her take.
I did Ayurveda. I did, Chinese medicine after. And I mean, it was a big mix of things for me. I had a different story, obviously, in the postpartum, where I felt like I was a little bit confused about what I was supposed to do. But certainly, like, I went into it thinking, like, I want to try this, because people have been doing this for so long. For me, it was just very special circumstances, I think. But I do think there are some things that are rooted in the right kind of, this was the reason people keep doing this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I did listen to your podcast, Jasmine, and I really appreciated everything that you shared as well. And especially given your background as a pharmacist, I felt like it was important that you said, hey, I tried to do the confinement, it didn't always work out, but there's also something really beautiful about your parents and your dad, you said, bringing over your remedies, and, that's something that he just wanted to do culturally. But I don't know how much you'll hear in Western traditions that dad brought over a soup for me postpartum, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah. I also love that it's, and as an LCSW myself, right, there's like only so much that I learn. It's like, there's only so much CBT I can give. So like, let's do CBT. What's your thought journal? Let's do DBT. Like, and no knock on any of those types of interventions, because they obviously help people. But I think people are a whole being with all our cultures and traditions. And so I love that you bring that into the healing work you do, because we aren't all just one type of person. And I even think of some of our previous guests who have also talked about what things might have been like if there was a clinician or therapist that really met them where they're at with their whole identity. And I think those things are really beautiful to weave into the healing work. Katrina, thanks so much for sharing your story, the work that you do. You named a couple of resources. If you can tell us a little bit more of those, but also more importantly, where can people find you? Especially if people are like, that's the therapist I want to see. Where can our listeners find you?
Yes, I do have a website, www.firemoonmedicines.com. And I am also, for those seeking psychotherapy, I'm part of a private practice group called Expansive Therapy. They're wonderful. And we have kind of a specialization in marginalized communities.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I'm on Instagram at Fire Moon Medicines. So yeah, those are all the ways you can find me.
Awesome.
Okay, and then just to wrap up the episode, we usually like to ask our guests and just go around quickly share something that we're going to do for our mental health this week. Started as something like fun and cheesy, but we've been getting feedback that people actually kind of like these ideas, that it gives them ideas of what to do during the week. So now we just keep doing it.
Totally. I love this. So my self-care this week is that I'm actually going to be spending some time with my family, with my parents. And I am going to go to dinner tonight with a friend. And I extra sweetened my tea with honey today, so that's a little bit of a syrup. In general, I try to. I'm a little bit sensitive to sugar, so I try to stay away from it. But coming into the episode, I was like, I'm going to reward myself with some extra honey in my tea.
You deserve it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you want to go, Jasmine?
I'm still thinking.
Oh, okay, I can go. Mine's kind of random. I feel like I decided to prioritize my physical health this week, and sometimes a lot of our mood and stuff could be something going on physically. So, and it's been a while since I saw a primary care doctor. So following up on my physical health, because it's so entwined with our mental health. So that's not as exciting as some other things that people are doing. But I feel like I needed to prioritize my physical health.
Yeah, that's really important because it's all linked, right? If your physical health goes down, your mental health goes down. Your mental health goes down, sometimes it shows up in your physical health.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I think for me this week, I want to carve out a little bit of time to write. I recently went away for the first time away from my baby overnight on like a mom's trip. And so had a lot of like feelings and thoughts, and just this month in general for me was kind of like, when I look back, a turning point in my postpartum depression. So I look back on October very fondly in general. So I think I have like a lot of like thoughts just swirling around. So usually when that happens, I need to sit down and actually write it out because it helps me organize. So that's what I'm going to do later this week. Yeah.
Love it. Well, thanks again, Katrina. We are so glad that you shared your story with us today. Again, happy Filipino Heritage Month. And
Yay.
Also, I know that we are ending Pregnancy and Infant Loss Month. So again, listeners, check our episode notes for any of those resources that you might need.
We hope you have enjoyed Healing the Tigress and our conversations on maternal mental health in the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Please follow our show and our Instagram page to catch our latest episodes. We have so many fantastic guests and deep topics that we are so excited to cover soon.
If you enjoyed this episode or would like to support us more, we would love it if you left us a review and shared this podcast with a friend to spread the word. Check out the show notes for more links. Thanks for joining us today, and we hope these conversations will help our AAPI mothers heal their inner tigress and honor their mental health as they deserve to. See you next time.